make a decision is obviously a lot more complicated. So in the end, he lost all his money that he put into this venture. And the reason why he failed is because he never realized that the past success has become key risk factors for him. So in this scenario, the usual way to promote business become a risk factors. And in many other ways, the usual way people do business can also become a risk factor when outside circumstance changed. And for example, a lot of the small to mid-sized business have encountered cash flow crisis under the COVID-19 crisis. And behind it, it actually revealed the habitual thought patterns these CEOs have. And why do they do that? It's because people rely on experience to make conclusions and to make decisions. But experience has 4 pitfalls. And here I'm outlining the 4 dimensions where experience will fail. Number 1 is something valid subjectively may not be valid objectively. For example, everyone thinks he can be the next Jack Ma, or he can be a great stock investor, but other people may not think that. Number 2 is something that's valid for one specific object or specific matter may not be valid for the others. For example, the Korean movie that won the Oscar, if you ask someone why it can win the Oscar, people will say, well, it reflects the social norms, it has very good productions. But similar Asian film, there are plenty of similar Asian films, none of them has won Oscar. Why does this particular one won? So this is a typical example of something that may be valid for one, but not valid for the other. Number 3 is valid today, but not tomorrow. Last week, everyone knows that Bank of China has lost a ton of money on trading of oil options. Before that, nobody would expect that oil option price could fall to negative, but now it happens. So it's valid today, but not tomorrow. Number 4 is valid for an individual, but not for a group. This is quite common, particularly in terms of relationship generalization. Sometimes I will see weird questions on Zhihu in China, saying that you should not date nurse or lawyer or primary school teacher because they all sucks. And everyone who support this question use their personal experience. And in doing that, they basically made the same mistake in generalization, which means valid for one person's personal experience does not qualify to say, it does not qualify the statement that the entire group is not a good dating subject. So to summarize these 4 dimensions where experience fell, what it may cause us is that we often tend to deduct the reasons based on the outcome. And in doing this, it's more about finding an explanation that fits our expectation rather than finding the true explanation that reflects the truth. And this is quite common in decision-making processes in human beings. Here, I need to raise another side of the problem in using experience or using your fixed pattern of thoughts. Knowledge and bias are the 2 sides of the same coin. At the beginning, it will be good for you to obtain more knowledge about a subject, but people tend to hold on this knowledge and become too stick onto it, and then it becomes bias. So you always have to strike the balance in knowing a lot versus knowing too much to the extent that you refuse to hear anything else that's contrary to what you already know. So this will also become a habitual pattern for many. And because of that, habitual thinking patterns have some bad outcome, even in management. It prevents the discovery of new ideas and methods, particularly when people just put knowledge as a bias. Okay, so here's a brief summary of how thought patterns interfere your decision. Number one, it will make you to make decisions based on past success, which may become risk factors for now. Number two, it will make you to make decisions based on past knowledge, which we know under full circumstance, it will fail. Number three is that it will allow you to make decisions based on single opinion or single view, which prevents creation and imagination. So how do we discover your patterns? There are 4 common ways I use when I help a lot of entrepreneurs to get out of their habitual behaviors. Number one is to use others as your mirror. Basically, you can ask your friends, your co-workers, or your boss to give you objective feedback. But you need to be very aware not to find someone that you are too familiar with, because you tend to ignore the suggestions these people gave you, or they probably have given you and you just didn't pay attention to them. So it's better to find someone who are not so familiar to the extent that you will still accept his suggestions, but also analytical enough that he or she can give you a more objective analysis based on your scenario. Number two is called Ask 3 Whys. Whenever you discover or try to figure out reasons for something, do not stop at the reasons. For example, a lot of the failed entrepreneurs that I taught will tell me that the company failed because they ran out of cash flow. But let's pause here. Cash flow or run out of cash flow is not a reason, it's an outcome. What is the reason that makes the entrepreneur losing their cash flow? So that's the second why you have to ask. And then they may tell you, okay, I don't pay enough attention to the cash flow problem. I don't know how to make it. Or I tried, but I just couldn't do it better. But these are not the end answer yet. You have to ask another why. And then they may tell you, okay, I actually didn't set my priority correctly, or I have trouble finding the right person because I actually do not know what kind of person can solve this problem. So you keep on asking why. It's a very effective way to break things that you take it for granted. Number 3 is called framework method. There are a lot of books on decision-making processes, and a lot of them will propose certain framework for you to analyze different scenarios. I will not go over this further because you can find it in books. Number 4 is called self-reflections. Basically, any decision-making processes requires a large chunk of self-reflective time for you to stay calm without interference from outside world, and to actually carefully analyze all the informations and all the processes that you have to consider. Often, a lot of the CEO I encounter, they miss this part. They will spend all their time meeting with people, having different meetings internally or externally, read a lot of information, but never leave enough time in making the actual decisions. So this part is quite crucial that I have seen a lot of people have missed. So Just then, I went through the first point, which is how to discover your habitual patterns. Now I'm moving on to the second point. Second point is your decision criteria. Any difficult problem you encounter does not test your logic. It actually tests your value system. I have to explain why I said this statement. Think about any difficult problem you encounter. Rational analysis just gave you the different factors. Logic gave you the different factors. But what assign a weight to the different factors is your value system, or to some extent, your instinct, your heart. These are all referring to the same thing under this context. When we talk about value system, I want to make a distinction. There is the moral value system, which is good versus evil, and there's the broad value system, which entails things that matters to you. For example, fairness, kindness, efficiency, success, money, family. These all belong to the broad value system. And the broad value system is a core criteria behind your decision-making processes. I'll give you a very brief example of a true event. One of my students runs a pretty large company. There is a rule in his company in which the partners in which nobody should date another co-worker within the company. But unfortunately, one of his co-founder started dating the CTO. So then he faced a tough decision. Should he keep the fairness of the system and let the CTO or the co-partner go, or should him keep both and then just break the law? So the CEO eventually decided to let the CTO go and keep the law, because fairness in his mind ranked higher than efficiency or outcome or short-term success. So I'm giving this example because it's a real scenario in which no one can tell which decision is better. There's no clear answer. So in this circumstance, the value system becomes the core criteria. Honestly speaking, like often when we are meeting with difficult decisions, there are many unknown factors that will interfere with the eventual outcome. Basically, no matter how you work hard, the outcome you get may fall below your expectations. That's why in these kind of scenarios, it's important to stay true to who we are, stay true to our heart, so that later on, regardless of the outcome, you will not regret. And that's what I mean by with a clear value system, difficult decisions become an easy shortcut to your life goals, can be discovered. I'll give you another example in which students have deployed this method. I have a student who was a very successful entrepreneur abroad. He returned to China, started a company in healthcare industry. He suffered a lot throughout this processes because the company runs into some problems and he was under a lot of stress. So when he came to me, we actually initially was trying to solve the different management problem his company faced. But later on, I sensed there was some unwillingness and uncertainty he had about doing this company. So we then drill down to his value system and realized that under his top 3 core values, family rank number 1. And here, family is defined by his mother. And why is that? Which is quite surprising, right, for an entrepreneur. Shouldn't he be putting success, money, wealth, influence as a top priority? So we drill down further, and then we discovered that the reason why he wanted to found a healthcare company was to fulfill a childhood wish his mother had. Once we discover that, then things become a lot easier to resolve because there are many ways to fulfill his mother's wishes. For example, he could do a foundation, he could do an investment company, rather than he himself being the entrepreneur or being the CEO of a healthcare startup. He could also spend more time with his mother, which matters so much to him. So after the class, this guy basically went back, shut down his company, helped the employee finding other jobs, and then used the money, did an investment company. And he feels so much happier now because he understands what matters most to him and was able to spend more time with his mother. That's what I mean by sometimes with a clear value systems, difficult decisions become easy because you can get rid of a lot of the factors that you may thought they were important, but they were actually not. Okay, so basically the initial reasons for someone to become entrepreneur reflects your value system. And it's very important when the entrepreneur trying to think about the future of the company, especially under a lot of stress. For example, if the initial reasons to founding a company is for wealth, then the first priority should be taking care of the company's cash flow. If the initial reason is to have a good team or gather a gang of friends and make everyone happy, then the first priority should be taking care of the team. If the reason is to gain more influence and become reputable or become respectable, then how to properly close down the company while showing someone's responsibility and earning people's respect will become a top priority. So as we can see, the core value system will actually dictate how you deal with these issues. Okay, so how do we discover your value system? There are two methods. Number one is to contemplate on important life events. You can write down all the life events that are crucial in your life, and you will discover some common elements from these events. These usually is a sign of your core value system. Number two is reverse engineer using other people's value system. We have at Zhen Academy, we actually have a list of 50-ish common value system, value keywords, and we will give it to the students, and they will do the exercise where they will try to compare these keywords to what they think is important and refine the definition. Okay, so we just went over the second part, which is decision making criteria. Now we are moving to the third part, which is emotional triggers. Emotional triggers are usually pitfalls for decision makers because A, it destroys their calm state. B, it affects decision quality. C, it negatively impacts personal relationships. But here I need to explain what are emotional triggers. Emotional triggers are usually keywords, phrases, or actions that somebody did that will trigger intense emotions in you. That's disproportional. Basically, these words or key phrases or actions will remind you of something really harsh happened in your previous life that could become a mental scar. For example, one of my students was had a failed business in which he laid off over 150 employees one day, one by one, face to face. So that event has basically leave a scar in his heart because he really valued teams. So when he restart a new company, unconsciously or subconsciously, he has a tendency not to even touch anything that will remotely remind him of that event. As a result, there were people who will perform poorly in his company, but he will not do anything about it because it's an emotional trigger that will make him feel uncomfortable and painful. So everyone can have emotional triggers. How do we deal with them? If you become emotional, but out of no reason, the first thing you need to do is to calm down yourself. And then later, you have to do a thorough reflection. Write down what exactly happened. And if these kind of scenarios happen again, then you can conclude what are the common theme or common keywords in both scenarios. And these will become your emotional trigger. Not become, these are the emotional trigger you already have. Then next you have to do is a series of psychological steps to get rid of them, which is a little bit long, so I will not go into details, but there are ways to effectively address them. And if you see other people that may be triggered emotionally, there are techniques to calm others. Number one is allow them to vent. Once they vent out the emotions, they can be on logical terms and can be reasoned with. Number two is more effective when the counterparty is in rage or is full of emotions. You simply repeat what they say. Because when people are swamped by emotions, it's very difficult for them to hear complete sentence. They can only hear a sentence or words piecewisely. So you have to keep on repeating them until this message is nailed in their mind. And then they will become more reasonable. So these are the two techniques to calm others if they were triggered emotionally. Okay, I think we are on time for the speech. I actually rushed through some points because I want to leave more time for Q&A. Let me just summarize today. We talked about the three key components in making a wise decision. Number one is to understand your habitual patterns, or basically your repetitive thought and behavior patterns. These are the decision routine. And if you can avoid them, then you can gather better or more objective information. Number two is to understand clearly your core value system or your decision criteria. And sometimes understanding of these will make life much easier. Number three is to understand your emotional triggers or your decision pitfalls. Happy to go into Q&A now.
Wow, thank you so much, Jigu. First of all, that was a great talk, and I think it raised some very interesting points. So again, just calling everyone to type your questions in the Q&A section. There's already some questions, so we'll read them out in just a second. I'll give you guys some more time in case you think of more info. Maybe meanwhile, Jigu, you can tell us, how can we become a student of yours?
Oh, okay. We gave a class mostly in Chinese, but I do have an English class. That's an offline class, which is difficult nowadays.
So we have to wait a little bit or contact you on WeChat maybe?
Yeah, you can contact me on WeChat. That might be easier. But I do offer one-on-one consultation for people. It's more like a decision. It's more like an executive coach service if people is interested.
Perfect. Awesome. I'm sure there's going to be many interested. So I want to get started on the first questions. So Joanne is asking, could you please tell your own experience in the pandemic with the decision-making process? Maybe some of your experiences where you have had to make a difficult decision in this time. Yeah, do you have Do you have something practical for yourself? How you applied your own methods onto this?
I actually do. Frankly speaking, the pandemic didn't really affect me a lot because I basically just stay at home. But I do discover that my past emotion triggers has resurfaced sometimes when I'm living with my family, and unfortunately, my relationship with my mother wasn't that close. So she tend to be quite critical, like a lot of the Chinese parents, and I have emotional triggers on that, basically. So I usually have to calm myself down before I get housed by her constant criticism of everything I do, basically. So that's my own personal story in applying that.
That's a very honest reply. Thank you for that. Actually, also with that, there's another question. You mentioned the initial reasons to become an entrepreneur and how that also links together with the value systems. What was your reason to become an entrepreneur, or would you say there are better reasons or worse reasons? And is there any hierarchy, or maybe a little more on that?
I personally don't think there is any better or worse reasons. I personally think it's all individual choices. I actually do not judge people who seek to do entrepreneur for any reasons. For example, today one of my students was telling me that another of my students were trying to borrow money from her under the pandemic, probably because his business ran into cash flow issues. But honestly, his business was not even making money before the COVID-19 crisis. So my student's comments was he just doing gambling? Honestly, I do not know, and I don't want to make that kind of judgment on anyone. I think everyone has their free will to choose, and everyone is an adult as long as he or she can bear the responsibility of the decision. As for me, I moved into startup world after spend I think 3 years as an executive in gaming business. The reasons are multifold. Number one is I want to gain more ownership or more say, basically, in how something grow from nothing into a big venture. Because when you are executives, a lot of the times you are dealing with existing routine and stuff. You can't really create or shape it based on your value system. I'm someone who pays a lot of emphasis on certain core values. So that's one reason. Number two is I'm a little bit, I ran into a little bit of glass ceiling in my previous company. So I was looking for opportunities where I can break through the glass ceiling. And number three is I'm a product manager by nature. I actually love to create stuff. And startup is a process of creation by its own.
Okay, very interesting. Another question from an anonymous attendee. What if I find myself still in the way of shaping my value system and changing my priorities? How can I deal with that? I guess is the question.
What
if I find myself still in the way of shaping my value system and changing my priorities? So basically, I guess this is a younger attendee still finding out what are my core values. So if I don't have that set, or I can't find a way to figure it out, is there a way to get around it, or any recommendations?
Okay, basically everyone has their core value system, regardless of whether you're aware of it or not. But the value system will actually be changing through different stage of life. It's just a much slower processes. If you have trouble finding your core value system, there is a simple incident. Try to recall events in your life in which you suddenly become super angry. Usually what makes you super angry is because that thing has violated your core value system. For example, fairness is a very important value in my core value system. So in China, it's quite common to see people jumping queues. And every single time I will try to stop them, regardless of how other people view me, because that just makes me so angry. It's not fair.
Okay, so basically what makes me angry is what's part of my value system because I don't accept the situation that way.
No, there is a nuance in it. What makes you angry, but it shouldn't. But if it's a personal attack, then of course it will make you angry. So you have to get rid of the personal attack circumstance. Yeah. For example, the jumping the queue, it's not a personal attack. Nobody attacks me.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting. So that's also very important to note, actually, to know about yourself. Your value system will change and it's normal to change, but you do have one at any point of time. You just need to figure it out. Interesting. Yeah. So Claudia Yu, I guess she's maybe Chinese because she's asking the Chinese class, whether it's online.
Right now the Chinese class is not online, but I do offer one-on-one consultation session online.
Wow, amazing. Kansani is asking, I struggle with making decisions based on past knowledge or experiences. Besides regularly reading and researching new information, how else can I overcome making decisions based on past knowledge?
There is a way to do it, but it's a very tough way of doing it. When you're trying to make a decision and you realize that you have a lot of past knowledge about this matter, you have to create an imaginary enemy in your mind. This enemy takes the complete opposite stand of what you know. And you have to power him or her in attacking every single argument you put forward to support your decision. So basically inside your mind, you have basically two parties arguing each other, going on a debate with completely opposite decisions. And eventually you will find one party win over. It could be your old thoughts, but it could also be a very new thoughts. This is a difficult process because it requires a lot of self-discipline, but it is very, very useful and effective.
Okay, and maybe also in that context, you said one of the parts that crises make decision-making so difficult is the lack of information or reliable information. Do you have any tips during this pandemic where to get access to real information that I can rely
on? Information has its quality. Usually, real experience have higher quality than second-hand information. So the best information usually is real experience. But because we probably won't be able to hear a lot of people's real experience, the way to do it is to check multiple sources, cross-check, cross-verify. It will help to reduce biases in information.
Okay, here's another interesting question by Anonymous. What is a major difference between the decision-making of Chinese entrepreneurs versus Western entrepreneurs, such as those from the USA?
It's going to become a generalization if I say anything because I don't have a complete data set. I once did a short presentation for a bunch of American investors. Some difference in mentality that I observed. I think often in China, you will realize that speed is important, the speed for which the company grow. For example, Luckin has become IPO in 3 years, and people keep trying to push for the speed and the efficiency. Whereas in the US, I personally don't sense this as a top priority. I do sense like seeking value creations, seeking originality, seeking creativity is emphasized more often. So that's a difference in what they value that I have observed. But I have to put a disclaimer. I've only observed a few hundreds of them. It's not big enough.
That's quite a lot already, but we definitely understand. We're not gonna assume this is validated information. That's completely fine. Kinsani is asking, please share your experience on being female and being in charge of decision making. Do you have challenges of being respected when you make decisions? Oftentimes, people don't take my decision making seriously because I am a woman, even when I make good decisions. Have you had similar experiences?
Most of the working environment I had with majority male. I think it will take some time for people to get used to you and to know your decision qualities. There's always two sides of the story. On one side, you could say people may not be paying attention to you. On the other side, it may also be your decision isn't as good as you think. But of course, females tend to criticize themselves more often than male, which is also quite common in Korea. So I will not going over on the second part. Supposedly, if it's the first part that people do not pay attention to you, then you personally have two choices. Number one, you can find an environment that's more female friendly, or you could be like me, doing my own company. If you are the boss, everyone has to listen to you. That's another reason for doing a startup. But jokingly along, put the joke aside, number two, what you can do is you can observe how the male get their decision went through. There are certain rules and norms in each companies that will make people value your decisions. If you do not know the norms and nuance, then be observant first. Once you see how other people get their way through, then you mimic them. You learn from them or you copy them. But sometimes you have to be a bit more aggressive than the males. If once doesn't work, try again. Twice doesn't work, try again. As long as you are valuable to the company, eventually they will notice you for sure. Because any smart businessman are not dumb. They will not miss out a valuable employee.
That's very motivational, and I hope it works out for you. Abdella asks, due to cultural matters, sometimes you don't get answers from people you ask for advice. Sometimes people give you only positive answers, but in some other cases, people may give you harsh feedback, like saying this is rubbish, leave it, go away. I personally got such feedback, so I guess feedback's based on cultural differences. How do you decide or choose in such cases?
Okay, so if people directly say to you that this is rubbish, number one is try to stay calm. Understand that they probably just are ignorant in giving effective feedback. So keep calm is number one. Don't get offended. Don't feel that you were attacked personally. Count 1, 2, 3, deep breath. And then you can ask clarify questions. If they said to you, this is shit, then you can say, for the sake of my own learning, so that next time I can deliver a better piece of work to you, could you tell me more specifically what is wrong with it? Is it because, I'm just giving a random example, for example, I have a book here. Is it because the cover color doesn't look nice? Is it because the title is confusing? Is it because, like, if they do not know how to describe it, you can give them prompt to help them. And if they keep just saying this is shit, then you keep asking them to clarify for the sake of making their days easier in the future. Because if they're your boss, they have to understand that any time they spend to teach you will make their life easier later. And if they do not understand that, you can tell them that, because maybe he's having a bad day. His wife scolded him, he lose money on stock market, who knows? Try to be more understandable and ask clarify questions. But if things keep going on for a long time, and every time you push back, they still do the same thing to you, then it will not be healthy for your mental state. So in those cases, it will be better to change to a friendly environment, or switch to a department, or switch a boss.
Okay. Angela Chen has another question. She says, I have a question about following or being the right founder of career path. So I guess being a good founder. I'm grateful to have founded a good team which fights for the same core values, but we have emotional triggers in the company that couldn't make us sincerely focus on entrepreneurships, but many inner wars like in a family. What should we do? Thank you.
Many in the words in the family. Sorry,
I think so. I think what she's talking about is she has a good team that fights for the same core values, but at the same time they also maybe have the same emotional triggers, which causes them to have fights in between themselves instead of focusing on external issues or developing entrepreneurship. I hope I understand this right.
Okay. Thanks for the explanation. So if that's the case, basically within your teams, you have different emotional triggers or similar emotional triggers. What you need to do is have small meetings where your team members can write down what triggers them. For example, Alice being constant late, that is an emotional trigger for me. Susan always go off work earlier, that's an emotional trigger for me. Sarah delivers the work late every time, that's an emotional trigger for me. Like, write down these actions. For these among these actions, put out the common threads and do a deep analysis. So if, for example, you will be triggered by someone leaving early, then think carefully if that reflects certain value or certain things about you. What are you scared of? Are you scared of that are you scared of that you are not as efficient as someone who leaves early? That's one possibility. Or are you angry because you think it's a violation of fairness? Or are you triggered because when you were young at school, you were leaving early once and was scolded by a teacher or by your parents, or even beat up by them. Like, these are all the subtle reasons underlying your reaction towards someone's action of leaving early. So once you do a deep dive like this, then you can figure out what essentially triggered these emotions. So everyone in the team has to do this exercise. and then they can share about these triggers with each other, not in the way of attacking the other party, but in the perspective of deeper analyze or improved self-awareness and improved understanding of each other. It will help to heal basically the division within the team members.
Would you say you can get rid of these emotional triggers, or is it more something you just have to recognize and communicate clearly, and then that's how you deal with it?
You can get rid of the emotional triggers, but it requires the person who has the emotional triggers to do a lot of work. For example, the reason why I mentioned being late is an emotional trigger is because I had the emotional triggers myself. I used to hate myself if I run late for meetings consecutively. If I was late for one meeting, I would tell myself, "Oh, you suck." If I was late for two meetings, I would tell myself, "Oh shit! Like, why are you? Like, what's the purpose of your life? Like, you can't even be on time for the meetings. Anything? Like, can you do anything better?" That basically goes down and down and down. So you can see there are a lot of the self-criticism that caused me to become more and more emotional. And it's actually a unconscious thought pattern in me. So what I need to do is when I'm not emotional, I have to write down. First, I have to analyze and find out that being late is an emotional trigger of me. And then I have to write down if I'm late, what I will be going through in my mind. Basically, these thoughts that will fuel my emotion, these negative thoughts. And for each of the negative thoughts, I have to write down a counter argument to defeat them. So for example, if I say, "Oh, you sucked at this," then I will tell myself, it's just being late. It does not mean that you cannot do the work. It does not mean that you cannot give the presentation. It does not mean that your life is completely ruined. So I have to keep writing this down. And the next time if I'm running late and I start this train of negative thoughts in me, then what I wrote down will appear in my mind and it will counterbalance these negative thoughts. And if you practice this exercise often enough, later on, you will find that once you are late again, the negative thoughts will stop because you already have all the positive thoughts that replace them. So that's how emotional triggers can be resolved, is to replace it with something else. But it requires practice. And I've done that not within myself. I've also tried it on a lot of my students, and it worked out very well.
That is super impressive. Wow. I wish we had so much more time. There's actually still 13 open questions, and I wish I could ask all of these, but we're actually already over time. So there's just one more question that I want to ask because I think it rounds things off quite nicely, which is by Anonymous, who says, "It's my second time listening to you, and I always learn something. Thank you for your time." I can only agree on that. My question is, are there some decision-making models out there that fits modern-day business decisions? And what books would you recommend for founders? You also mentioned earlier in the talk the framework method. There was a book. So maybe you can just let us know what are materials where we can learn more about what you said. Yeah.
Okay, I'll recommend one book because that's a lot faster. It's How Decisions Are Made. Sorry, let me put out the cover. A Primer on Decision Making: How Decision Happens by James Marchi. Sorry, I'm funny. WeChat. So small.
What was the name of it? A Primer on Decision Making?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll probably find it.
Yeah. But if you may allow me, because I saw a question that is actually crucial for someone, I think I can answer it very quickly. Someone asked how to make a decision if there are two controversial values that pull me in different directions. When you found values that pull you in different directions, that basically means one of them is not true value. They are emotional triggers, they are past mental scars, or they are things that you secretly desire that was not fulfilled. One of them is that they are not true values. So once that thing is fulfilled, then that value will disappear.
Okay, awesome. Well, I honestly can't thank you enough. I also learned so much just in this short talk of 1 hour that I'm sure is going to help me in my personal decisions and hopefully also in business decisions later on. So huge thank you. Just everyone around the world, maybe just send some positive vibes to Beijing so you can feel them through this virtual webinar. Petra's is clapping. And yeah, so just use this chance to scan her QR code. And since we want to have some feedback so we can improve our future events, here's a QR code that you can scan, and please let us know how we did so we can be better next time. So I'll just leave this on for a few seconds, and yeah, just a huge thank you again to you, Jigu, to Beehive, and everyone else from Startup Ground University for being a part of this and making this possible. And yeah, I'm really happy we could have this talk.
Thank you, Jigu. It was incredible. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, Petros. Thanks, everyone. And I hope it's useful, and happy to stay in touch on WeChat.
Yep.
All right.
Let's...
So